Humans are fascinated by gore and violence, but even more so the mysterious and unsolved. This interest in disturbing and unpleasant subjects is called morbid curiosity, and it has gripped hundreds of people throughout the ages. I am one of those people. My name is Hallie, and this is the Morbid Curiosity Podcast. This week's episode topic was suggested by a listener, Cassie, and her group of friends called the Mermaid Mafia. She suggested I talk about shipwrecks. When I asked which one, she said the creepiest one I could find. Well, I think I found something that satisfies your request, Cassie. How about an area full of shipwrecks, many of which have ghost stories attached to them? Today, I'm going to tell you about the Graveyard of the Pacific. The Graveyard of the Pacific is a nickname given to the stretch of coast in the Pacific Northwest that runs from Tillamook Bay on the northern coast of Oregon to Cape Scott Provincial Park on Vancouver Island. All along the coast, the land is rocky, especially along the northwestern tip of Vancouver Island. The weather conditions in the area are also unpredictable, and the currents are fast and strong. Reefs and rocks line the entire western coast of Vancouver Island. Besides the rocky coast, there are several natural features that make the area dangerous. Columbia Bar is a large sandbar at the mouth of the Columbia River, which acts as the border between Oregon and Washington State. It's 3 miles wide and 6 miles long, and located where the river's current dissipates into the ocean in the form of large standing waves. The waves, wind, and current are hazardous for vessels of all sizes. The closest U.S. Coast Guard station to the Columbia Bar is called Cape Disappointment. The cape was named for Captain John Mears, who failed to find the Columbia River in 1788. Mears was a fur trader, and due to a storm he was forced to turn his ship around and missed the mouth of the Columbia River by mere miles. Pardon my pun. Cape Disappointment is covered in fog for around 106 days a year, making it one of the foggiest places in the United States. This fog is another reason the area is so dangerous. The Strait of Juan de Fuca is a large body of water near the coast, and provides an outlet from the Salish Sea into the Pacific Ocean. The boundary between the U.S. and Canada runs down the center of the strait. It surrounds Cape Flattery, the northernmost point of the contiguous United States, and is known for its rough seas. A nearby island to the south of the strait was aptly named Destruction Island after 3 ships were wrecked on its beaches in 1889. The lighthouse on the island was built soon after the wrecks, but has since been shut down. To this day, the island is empty and only accessible by boat. I'll post a map on Twitter at Morbid Podcast and Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast so you can see the area I'm talking about. The name Graveyard of the Pacific may also relate to the ongoing state of warfare that blanketed the area in the days of the early maritime fur trade. Russia, Spain, Great Britain, and the native peoples were in a constant state of violence against one another in this area at that time, making it not only dangerous at sea, but also on land. More than 2,000 vessels and 700 lives have been lost near the Columbia Bar alone. Wrecks have decreased since 1920, but several lives are still lost every year. The skeletons of many shipwrecks are still visible along the coast. Salvage attempts are often unsuccessful due to the age of the wrecks, the dangerous weather and waves, and the extensive damage suffered by the vessels at the time they were wrecked. Though there have been hundreds of wrecks in this area, I want to tell you about a few of the more famous ones. Just remember, in the context of shipwrecks, famous usually means tragic. The most well-known of these wrecks is the SS Valencia. The Valencia was a passenger steamer that was built in 1882 to transport people between New York City and Venezuela. During the Spanish-American War, it was used as a troop ship, but resumed passenger services after the war was over. It was a large vessel, weighing 1,598 tons, and it was 252 feet or 77 meters long. Because of its size, the Valencia didn't handle well in the winter months when the sea was more turbulent. The noise of the waves breaking against the bow made communication difficult, and the length of the ship made steering difficult in foggy conditions. The Valencia was a slow ship and was considered small by the passengers that traveled on it. During the winter, it usually stayed at port in San Francisco, but in January of 1906, the Valencia took over the San Francisco-Seattle route when the usual ship that ran this route needed repairs. The Valencia set off with 9 officers, 56 crew, and 108 passengers towards Seattle. As they passed Cape Mendocino in Northern California, the weather took a turn for the worst. With strong winds kicking up and low visibility due to fog, both of which were already an issue for the Valencia. They lost their position completely. Unable to see the stars for navigation, the crew turned to dead reckoning, a process of calculating the current position of a ship based on previous positions and estimations of the passage of time and distance traveled. Basically, they made an educated guess. Unable to see land and with strong winds and currents forcing the ship forward, the Valencia missed the entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca and struck a reef on the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. The captain reversed the ship and the crew assessed the damage. The gash left by the rocks was so large that water was pouring in fast. To keep the ship from going under the waves completely, the captain drove it further up onto the rocks. The ship was stranded in sight of land, but separated from it by 50 meters of freezing, choppy surf. In the confusion, lifeboats were lowered without permission of the crew. 3 of the boats turned over while being lowered, spilling the occupants into the sea. 3 more were successfully launched, but 2 of these capsized in the waves and the other disappeared. Chief Freight Clerk Frank Len would later recount the horrific scene, saying, "The screams of women and children mingled in an awful chorus with the shrieking of the wind, the dash of the rain and the roar of the breakers." As more passengers rushed onto the deck to try and escape, they were carried away by huge waves that seemed as high as the ship's mastheads. The ship began to break apart. Women and children were tied to the rigging to keep them from washing away. It was freezing, and it was all the women could do to shield their children with their own bodies, clad only in night dresses. Eventually, 12 men made it to shore in a lifeboat, but 3 of them were washed away by the waves after landing. The 9 men that were left scaled the cliffs and felt some relief when they spotted a telegraph line through the thick forest. They followed the line for hours before finding a lineman's cabin to summon help. Meanwhile, the last lifeboat on the Valencia was lowered, filled with volunteers and the ship's deck manager. They planned to find a safe landing place and return to the cliffs to receive a lifeline or rope from the ship. When they landed, however, instead of scaling the cliffs as planned, they followed a sign that pointed toward Cape Beale in hopes of finding help more quickly. They marched for 2.5 hours to the lighthouse. The keeper called for help, and the group learned that help was already on its way. This group of survivors was the last to look upon those left aboard the Valencia. 3 ships came to rescue the people left on board the sinking Valencia, but they were unable to approach due to the severe weather and the unknown depth of the water near the wreck. Unable to help the passengers still left aboard, they began to troll the sea, searching for survivors. They recovered a lifeboat with 18 men aboard, but no other survivors were found in the water. A second lifeboat eventually drifted ashore on an island in Barkley Sound, where 4 other survivors were later found and taken in by the island's First Nation tribes. When the 9 men of the land rescue party arrived at the cliffs overlooking the wreck, they found dozens of passengers clinging to the rigging. Only a few parts of the ship were left above the churning water, but the majority of passengers still aboard decided to remain on the Valencia, believing that one of the nearby ships they could see in the water around them would soon reach them. Not long after this decision was made, the Valencia's funnel collapsed, leaving everyone on board exposed. All remaining passengers were at the mercy of the sea's waves. Without any remaining lifelines, the rescue team could only watch as the waves pushed the wreckage off the rocks and into the sea, taking all who remained aboard with it. 136 people lost their lives that day. Another ship that met its end in the graveyard of the Pacific is the SS Pacific. The Pacific was an 876-ton steamer that began its life running a passenger service between San Francisco and Panama, many of the passengers being prospectors hoping to make it big in the Fraser Canyon gold rush of 1858. The ship's route changed several times, and in 1875, the Pacific ferried passengers between San Francisco and Victoria, British Columbia. On November 4, 1875, the Pacific was traveling down from Victoria, loaded to the gunwales with passengers and listing badly. Efforts to steady the ship included filling the lifeboats on one side with water, then doing the same on the other side to recompensate when the vessel listed in the opposite direction. No lifeboat drills had been held that morning, and even if the passengers had practiced, only 145 of the estimated 300 passengers would have fit into those lifeboats. Around 8 p.m., the Pacific ran right into the SS Orpheus, when the Orpheus moved too close to the side of the Pacific. Both vessels continued their courses, thinking the damage had been minimal. The captain of the Orpheus later claimed that he had not even noticed that a collision had taken place. While the Orpheus continued on its course, the Pacific began to sink off the coast of Cape Flattery. The lifeboats that were usable were filled with women and children. Some of the crew also wriggled their way into the lifeboats with those who had managed to gain a spot. In one case, a crew member went as far as throwing out the husband of a woman who had made it into the lifeboat, despite her pleas that he stay with her. The lifeboats were lowered into the frigid waters, but none of the people in them survived, and the boats themselves went down soon after the ship sank. Over 300 people drowned. Women were the first to be pulled under the water thanks to the voluminous skirts that were in fashion then. An estimated 20 people survived the sinking and clung to life on pieces of the wreckage. Sadly, all but 2 of these people succumbed to hypothermia. Henry Jelly, a surveyor for the Canadian Pacific Railway from Ontario, survived the wreck by clinging to the wheelhouse, where he saw another survivor holding fast against the waves. The other man succumbed to the cold around 4 a.m. Saturday morning, 3 days after the sinking of the Pacific. The wreckage then drifted closer to Vancouver Island, and at 10 a.m., when Jelly was 3 miles from shore, he was spotted and rescued by an American ship called the Messenger. The only other survivor was Neil Henley of the Scottish Hebrides. He was a crewman on the Pacific. Like Jelly, he survived by climbing onto some wreckage where he was joined by the captain, 3 other crewmen, and 3 passengers. All the others died of hypothermia, but Henley survived from Thursday, the evening of the sinking, until Monday morning when the SS Oliver Wolcott picked him up. These 2 men were the only survivors of the wreck of the SS Pacific. They both testified at an inquest afterwards. The crew of the Orpheus, the ship that collided with the Pacific, indicated that their captain, Captain Sawyer, had been drinking and unsure of his location at the time of the collision. He had swung alongside the Pacific in hopes of consulting its captain when he struck the ship instead. Thinking the other ship had not been damaged, he sailed away, a fact that at the time was thought to contribute to the great loss of life. Shortly afterward, the Orpheus itself ran aground after Captain Sawyer confused the Cape Beale lighthouse with that of Cape Flattery. There's a rumor that the SS Pacific was carrying a hefty sum of money when it sank. According to the 1861 manifest from another voyage of the Pacific, the steamship carried not only passengers, but also a cargo of $206,000 in gold dust shipped by the Wells Fargo Company. A British Columbian historian, Garnet Basque, observed that whatever the true amount held on the ship the day it sank, the treasure of the SS Pacific lies in only 10 to 12 fathoms off the coast of Cape Flattery. A wreck with an aura of the unknown that may reside in the graveyard of the Pacific is the Beeswax Wreck. The location of this wreck is unknown, but it is thought to have gone down somewhere near the mouth of the Nehalem River on the coast of Tillamook County, Oregon. This ship is thought to be a Spanish galleon that wrecked in the 1600s and carried a large cargo of beeswax, lumps of which have been found scattered along Oregon's north coast for the last 2 centuries. The earliest written account of the wreck dates to 1813, when a fur trader noticed that the local tribes of the area had large quantities of beeswax to trade. They told him it came from a shipwreck near Nehalem Bay. Efforts to locate the wreck then and now have failed, but researchers have found clues to the ship's identity in the debris that has washed ashore. Teak timbers and shards of Chinese porcelain indicate a Spanish Manila galleon, which would have made regular trips from Manila to Mexico in the days of the Spanish Empire. These ships were often made of teak and carried luxury goods such as Chinese porcelain and beeswax. Studies of the porcelain in 2011 concluded that the wreck must date from the late 17th century. Only 2 galleons went missing in that time, the Santo Cristo de Burgos in 1693 and the San Francisco Xavier in 1705. Further surveys resulted in the theory that the ship is most likely the Santo Cristo de Burgos. The search for this ship continues to this day. One of the 3 ships that wrecked on the coast of Destruction Island in 1888 was the Wide West. The hull, which belonged to an older ship made entirely of wood, was fitted with a steam engine and a propeller drive, and was used as a slow-moving barge. On December 25th, the Wide West under Captain Sparling was sent down the Columbia Bar and out to the Pacific Ocean to sail around the Olympic Peninsula. By January 6th, the vessel was lost at sea. Soon after crossing the Columbia Bar, the ship had met heavy seas and high winds. The large hull was unmanageable in the heavy swells, and the auxiliary sail was blown away by the wind. The propeller was torn off, and the ship wrecked on Destruction Island. As opposed to the Valencia and the Pacific, none of the crew were lost, but an estimated $15,000 worth of cargo was completely swept away. A more recent and less natural wreck is that of the SS Coast Trader, which occurred on June 7, 1942. The Coast Trader was built in 1920 in response to the loss of many ships to German U-boats during World War I. After a long, undistinguished career, the Coast Trader shifted to transporting cargo. It was carrying newsprint as it departed the Straits of Juan de Fuca when it was torpedoed by a submarine. It sank in less than an hour. The lifeboats, filled with the crew, floated through extreme weather. One man died of exposure, but the rest were rescued the next morning by a fishing boat. This ship still lies mostly intact at the bottom of the sea, and the wreck can be viewed online if you're interested at nautiluslive.org. Though hundreds of ships lie in the graveyard of the Pacific, the last one I'm going to talk about is the Emily Reed. The Emily Reed was a coal ship that was traveling toward Portland, Oregon when it was caught in a severe storm on February 14, 1908. Captain Kessel's chronometer was faulty, and he didn't realize how close he was to shore until it was too late. It was a little after midnight, and the sea was too rough to attempt to swim to safety. One lifeboat was launched with 4 men aboard, but it was apparently lost as soon as it hit the water. The rest of the crew remained on board until daylight. When the morning came, it brought with it a low tide, and the survivors managed to get ashore. The cargo of 2,100 tons of coal was washed out to sea without a trace. 7 men lost their lives. A boat later discovered the lost lifeboat 200 miles away from the wreck. Only one of the men aboard had died. The wreck of the Emily Reed still lies buried beneath the sands near Rockaway Beach, and occasionally, after a heavy storm, its skeleton can be seen from shore. In a place of such concentrated tragedy, there is little surprise that a cloud of ghost stories have formed over the area. 6 months after the wreck of the Valencia, a local Native American tribe claimed to have seen a lifeboat containing 8 skeletons in a sea cave near the site of the wreck. The mouth of the cave was high up on the cliffs, but the cave itself was over 200 feet deep. The tribe thought perhaps a very high tide with heavy waves could have lifted the boat into the cave. Due to the dangerous waters outside the opening, the lifeboat, along with the skeletons, was unable to be recovered. No one knows what happened to it. To this day, local fishermen report seeing lifeboats crewed by skeletons in the waters along the coast. The name Valencia visible along the sides of the boats. In 1910, 4 years after the Valencia sank, sailors claimed to see a phantom sinking ship resembling the Valencia near the point. The sailors reported human figures on the ship's rigging, dressed in white and peering out at them as the waves swallowed the ship. In 1933, one of the Valencia's lifeboats was found floating in Berkeley Sound. It was in remarkably good condition, but was empty of any evidence of the people who may have been aboard it 27 years earlier. Campers along the coast of the graveyard of the Pacific have reported strange lights on the beach. Sailors in the area also report phantom ships resembling the Valencia on occasion. There are many locations in the world's oceans that seem to swallow ships and other forms of transportation. These include the 2 graveyards of the Atlantic, one located at the entrance of the Chesapeake Bay to the Outer Banks of Virginia, and the other around Sable Island off the coast of Nova Scotia. The Bermuda Triangle, located between the southern tip of Florida, the island of Bermuda and Puerto Rico, and the shipwreck coast of Victoria, Australia, to name a few. These places all have a certain mystique about them, being places where hundreds of lives have been lost. The sea is a treacherous place. We have little control of the waves and the wind. This is perhaps why humans have not explored every inch of the ocean. The Earth is made up of 71% ocean, yet 95% of that is unexplored. We have sent 12 people to the moon, and only 3 have descended to the depths of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean. The knowledge we have collected is shockingly thin. Therefore, the sea remains mysterious and dangerous to us. The victims of shipwrecks and the ships themselves are often lost to the depths of the sea. Sometimes they wash up on shore days later, other times they are lost forever. There is no closure in an event like this, only tragedy and a lingering aura of mystery, which is why it brings out the curiosity in us. The Morbid Curiosity podcast was produced by HMS Lloyd. If you want to get in touch or suggest another morbid topic for me to talk about, you can tweet the show at Morbid Podcast or join us on Facebook and Instagram at Morbid Curiosity Podcast. If you like the show, please support us by following and reviewing us on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. My name is Hallie, and until next time, thank you for listening.